This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, we speak with artist Sandow Birk about his large and diverse body of work that utilizes art history and classical techniques to examine contemporary themes of social and political consequence. Birk has completed a host of public art projects across California, and his work is included in the collections of institutions such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, SFMOMA, the Getty, LACMA, and the Museum of Narrative Art. At the end of the episode, I'll be taking a look at some of the week's top art headlines. But first up, Thinking Big with artist Sandow Birk. Sandow Birk, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast to talk about you and your work and your vision. A lot of times I like to begin with a similar question for all my artists that I talk to, which is if you're at a dinner party and somebody walks up to you and they ask you what you do and you say you're an artist and they ask you to describe what your work is or what it looks like, how do you describe your body of work to somebody who's never seen it before?
Wow, yeah, that's a common question, especially I've had kids recently, and so once you have kids, you start hanging out less in the art world and more in just the world of soccer teams and things, and you meet a lot of people that have no idea what being a real artist is.
Right.
So I generally say that I'm a contemporary artist, that I do works, mostly paintings and drawings that draw on art history for inspiration and try to be about political and social themes from our times, from the times we live in.
That manifests itself in a lot of different ways. Your work, there seems to be a couple of common threads. One, it's kind of a reflection or a response to what's going on in our world, and it seems to be a response to art history. I guess when I look at your body of work, I'm amazed that you're one person producing this much work. It seems, because it seems really, really substantial. Let's just talk about one project, for example, like American Koran. How long did that project, before we even describe the project in itself, how long did that take you to complete?
When I sat down to begin it, I was estimating it was going to take 4 years, but it ended up taking 9 years.
Ah, jeez.
But I would preface it by saying, I've had this career. First of all, I haven't had a job since I was about 30. So maybe in my late 20s, I started making a real go of it, of making my whole entire income and career just be about working. So I work steady. I work every day. I'm in the studio. And then over the course of my career, I've had these projects where I have an idea and they sort of start small and then they just grow into these bigger ideas that become bigger than I ever imagined. And then when they're finished, they're done. And then usually that one project will lead to the next project, which leads to the next project. And so it's been to me, it's like one string that just keeps sort of growing as I go.
Was that 9-year period that you were working on American Koran, was that the only thing you were working on, or was there other work that was going on alongside it?
There had to be other work because it was unsustainable, just, as far as I didn't have any income without doing other things on the side. So I was always kind of doing side things, and it was off and on. I mean, ideally, it would have been straight through. I prefer on working on only one or two things at a time.
When I was in LA a few weeks ago, Sean Meredith was displaying some of the panels from the work. And how did it start? Did you start with the thought of doing just one verse and one picture, and then it turned into something much bigger than you thought?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this because tomorrow is the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and I was actually thinking about this project all morning today.
Right.
But yeah, to give you some background, this project sort of started because I did a previous project in the early 2000s. It was all about the war in Iraq. Mm-hmm. And it was a big print series that I was invited to work with this master printer named Paul Maloney, and it ended up being this 3 or 4 year long project of doing a series of enormous woodblock prints that told the whole story of the war in Iraq from the beginning, 9/11 and on to the invasion, And then at the time we were working, the war was still going on, and then to imagining how that was going to end. So during those 3 years, I was working with my partner, who's now my wife, Elise Pignolet,
Mm-hmm.
and we were working with the printers in Maloney Studio. And so for 3 years, we were like angry about the war in Iraq. We were paying attention. We were listening to NPR. This is sort of early days of internet. Working on this project, like following like the maps of the invasion and all the American radio discourse of Americans talking about Islam and so all these ideas of like, is Islam fundamentally like at odds with Western civilization? Is it an evil religion? Is it a violent religion? And just hearing this for years while we're working on this project. And somehow it's just sort of dawned on me during the course of this project. I've been a surfer my whole life, and I travel a lot to go surfing. And so I was listening to this discourse, and I started thinking to myself, like, wait a second, I've been to Islamic places in the world, and I think I counted 10 or 11 long trips to Islamic parts of the world in Asia and Africa and places where I'd spent considerable time. And I was thinking, my experiences in Islamic world is nothing like the way that Americans are discussing Islam. And sort of from that grain, I just sort of thought, I'm sort of tired of listening to people tell me what Islam is. I'm going to go find out for myself. And I just walked down to the bookstore and bought a copy of the Quran and started reading it. And that was how the whole project came about.
In terms of describing what the project is, how would you describe what the project is to a layperson?
What I set out to do was make a hand-transcribed English language version of the entire Quran using existing English translations. So I was writing every single word by hand, just like they used to do in the Middle Ages, and monks would do in abbots or whatever. And I wanted to make a whole entirely handmade English version of the Quran, and then illuminate all the pages with scenes of contemporary American life that reflected the meanings of the verses in the Quran, with the goal of showing that the Quran is accessible and applicable to a normal American's life, that it's not some strange, crazy thing from the other side of the world. So that was sort of the idea in a nutshell.
Can you give us an example of one of the panels, how you reinterpreted a scene from the Quranic text into what contemporary American life would look like in that context?
The first thing, just to summarize the Quran, is if you have no idea what it is and you just pick it up like I did and start reading it, the first impression that it makes on you is that it's incredibly familiar. It's just all the stories from the Bible told again or referred to. It's Adam and Eve and Moses and Abraham and Isaac and Jesus. There's a whole chapter devoted to Mary. It's just all the same things. And you start reading and you're like, what is the problem here? This is the same stories, just told in a slightly different way. And so an example would be like in the whole chapter that talks about Noah's Ark and the flood and it wipes out the whole world. It's sort of hard to imagine the entire world being wiped out, but it was really easy to see what happens when Hurricane Katrina wiped out New Orleans. So in those pages, I have scenes of New Orleans being flooded and people in boats, and a scene of a guy in a driveway in Seattle, like building a canoe. So there's just scenes of people going about things that are metaphors for the story of Noah's Ark.
If I remember right, in that illumination, I feel like there's like a graffiti text that you created to decorate the borders. I feel like that's something that shows up like in the Mirab sculpture work that you did. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I hand wrote the entire text, and I was reading about the Quran. I was reading about the Quran as a historic document and a Quran, Islamic artworks around the world and things. And I was very aware of how crucial to Islam is the calligraphy, the beautiful calligraphy. And so I knew that if I was going to even attempt to do this project, I needed to have some sort of calligraphy writing. And I started thinking, well, in contemporary times in the city that I live in, who are the people that still do calligraphy? And obviously it's graffiti writers who practice their own letters and write their names over and over in different ways. And so I decided I thought of graffiti as being sort of a uniquely American sort of calligraphy. So I set out to use like an early legible 1970s style Chicano graffiti lettering, and I sort of simplified it a little to make it more legible.
So in the end, it seems like I remember seeing that it was published as like a monoprint or something. Am I remembering that right?
I completed the whole project as each double page spreads were done as works on paper. So there's about 220 of those. So there's about 450 pages in the book, all illuminated. And when it was finished, the gallery I work with in San Francisco is the Catherine Clark Gallery, and she chased around town trying to find the publisher and ended up getting it published by Norton Books out of New York, and they did a huge coffee table book of it at 1:1 scale that I had done it in, and it's available in bookstores on Amazon and everything.
That's just one example of some of these larger projects that you take on. I mean, I hate to call you a glutton for punishment, but I mean, some of these projects are just, for example, Dante's Inferno, that's a rabbit hole that people have gone down before, and, trying to visualize that. That's a project that you kind of dove into. And can you talk about where that project started and the manifestations that it turned into?
Yeah, that's a good example of rabbit holes. But that project predates the War in Iraq project and predates the Quran. This was maybe around year 2000. I started working on Dante. It began because I was in a used bookstore and I stumbled on a hardback old copy of the Inferno with all the prints by Gustave Doré in them. And I had never read the Inferno. I didn't study it in school. And I bought the book for like $4 and brought it home, and I just loved it, the images. And so I'd look at it over time and sort of flip through it and look at it, and started reading parts of it, and I started to get sucked into the poem. But eventually I started thinking, these images are so great, they would be great to reinterpret them as scenes of Los Angeles, because I had a show scheduled like in a year to come up in Los Angeles. And so I went to my gallery and I said, the gallery was Copeland Del Rio Gallery in LA. And I said, I'm thinking about doing a series of paintings based on the Inferno. And she said, great, well, that can be your next show. And then it just started, this whole thing just snowballed from there, where just randomly I got contacted out of San Francisco by a place called Trillium Press that works with artists. And they said, would I do a project with them? And I said, I'm thinking about this Inferno thing. And they said, great, why don't you do a whole bunch of drawings and we'll make prints of the Inferno. And then it was growing. We said, yeah, we could be like a box set. But then we all thought it's kind of silly to have a bunch of drawings of the Inferno without the text of the Inferno. So then we said, okay, let's just put the text and the pictures, we'll make a book. And then we were going around trying to find out, well, what English language adaptation translation should we use? And then that led me to, I had a meeting in Hollywood with a lawyer that was a copyright lawyer, this woman, and she was trying to contact publishers that had published English versions and trying to get permission to use them to reprint them. And she was having trouble. And during the course of this meeting, she was just said, it's such a hassle trying to get in touch with these people. It would be so much easier if you just translated it yourself. And she said, sort of as a whim, as a joke. And that evening, I was hanging out with a surfer friend of mine named Marcus Sanders, who's a journalist. And we were in a bar talking, and he said, well, what are you working on? I said, I'm supposed to do this Dante project, but I'm supposed to translate it, but I don't know anything about it. And he said, well, I could do that with you. I studied it in college. I studied journalism. And he said, we could do that together. And so it went from that to then suddenly we were tackling sort of an English language adaptation of the Inferno, and that led to it being published in the book, and that led to an art show, and that led to it becoming a trade publication by Chronicle Books out of San Francisco. And once that was done, we went on and did Purgatory the next year and Paradise the next